Last week, we took a look at how to draw NURBS curves. You're going to use NURBS curves for your very first project, which is going to be to make an animated neon sign, something like this. And if I play the animation, you'll see that my neon sign is in fact animated. I can scrub through it, as well as render it. Now, one thing you'll remember about the NURBS curves, however, is that they will not render. So today we're going to look at one way that we can take our NURBS curves and make geometry from it that will render. So you'll remember from last week I showed you how you could draw NURBS curves, and we used this example of what is called a French curve, and we tried to describe this shape using Maya's CV curve tool. I'm going to very quickly review that. I'm not going to go into it in as great detail because you can watch my earlier videos to really learn how to use this tool. But for review, I will go to Create, Curve Tools, CV Curve Tool. And with that tool activated, I will start to describe this form. Now for these broad sweeping curves, I need fewer control vertices. For these tighter areas, I will need more control vertices. Click once, twice, 3 times. My curve actually will not start appearing until my 4th click. I'm going to put a few more points here. Again, I'm trying to be economical with this. The fewer points I can use to describe this form, the better. But I will put more points in these tighter areas here. I'm not concerned that I'm not perfectly describing the form yet. I will go in later on and rework its components to make it describe the form better. And I'll end it here. With this being my last point, I will press enter. Now you're going to be making a neon sign, and if you actually look at neon signs, you'll notice that they're not enclosed shapes. So I'm not going to enclose this shape either, although you will remember that you can, if you wish to. You simply go to the modeling tools, curves, and you can open or close a curve. Now it is a closed curve. I'm going to undo that because this example is going to be like a neon sign. Now that I have my curve, even though it doesn't perfectly describe the shape here, I will press 3 on my keyboard. This will make the curve look a little smoother. I will right click on the curve itself where I can select its different components, and I will select Control Vertex, and I will grab these control vertices and start to better describe the shape of this French curve. Now I can select these individual control vertices this way by simply using my mouse and selecting it, marquee selecting what I want. I can select multiple points at one time, of course. Another handy trick when working with control vertices is to select and then use your left and right arrow keys to systematically go through in order your control vertices. This is a very convenient way, especially in these areas where you have a number of points and it starts to get a little confusing. But you can see how I can very quickly improve upon my, my curve here to better describe this shape here. And that's looking pretty good. Like I said, I'm not going to actually close this shape because actually a neon sign would not be a closed shape. But this is pretty good. I'll right-click on the curve and go to Object Mode and perhaps hide my, my image plane so we can see the curve better. Now, I'm pretty happy with this curve. However, there are times when you may need to add more control vertices or more edit points to your curve. And of course, you can do so. You'll find under curves that you can insert knots. And what I recommend is watching my earlier video to learn those other techniques for helping to refine the curves that you draw. So now that we have our curve, let's take a look at how we can make this something that we can use for our neon sign, something that will actually render. Because if you remember, if we try to render this, and I'm going to switch my render over to Maya software, if we try to render this, we'll get nothing. There's nothing to render here. So we need to create geometry that we associate with this curve. And here's one way that we can do that, a way that will work very well for our neon sign. What I'm going to do is, with my curve selected, go here to Generate. Now, I'm having a little trouble here going to Generate because I get this menu that pops up for recording. But that's actually a perfect opportunity to show you another place where I can access all of these items up here. And that is by holding down the space bar in my viewport. And you'll notice that everything is available here as well. And in fact, here's Generate. And what I'm going to do is come down here to Curve Utilities, Attach Brush to Curves. And this will create the geometry that I can use for my neon sign. So let's take a look at this geometry. And one thing I would like to point out to you is that this is not a polygon mesh. It is actually what is called in Maya a brush stroke. So if I were to right click on this, I do not get the components of vertices, edges, faces, and so on. Now with this brush stroke selected, I am going to open up my attribute editor, which I can either open by clicking on the tab here or by typing Control A. That will also open up your attribute editor. You'll notice that I have a couple different tabs here. But if we look at the default brush tab here, you'll see that we have the brush profile. I'm going to expand that, and we can take a look at this property here, the brush width. If I need this brush to have a greater width, I can simply increase it or decrease it to the desired width. And here is my geometry. In addition to the brush width, there are some other properties that we can take a look at. I'm going to go to the Stroke Shape tab here, and we'll take a look at Sample Density, which is set to 1 right now. If I decrease the sample density, you'll see that I have less resolution, or if I increase it, I'll have greater resolution. And for a smoother result, perhaps I want this greater resolution on here. So I'm going to leave it at 2. If I needed a number higher than 2, I could manually input a value, such as 4. In fact, I think I'll go with 3. Now, as I indicated earlier, this is not a polygon mesh, but for the purposes of our neon signs that we're going to be creating, we are going to make this into a polygon mesh, and that is very simple to do. It'll also make it a little easier to work with later on. So with the brush stroke selected, and let's just take a look in the outliner very, very quickly so you can see what we have in here. We have our NURBS curve, which you saw me draw out earlier. We have our image plane, which I currently have hidden, and we have a brush stroke called stroke 1. Currently I have stroke 1 selected, and what I'm going to do is go to Modify, Convert, and I'm going to look for Paint Effects to Polygons. Now, if I click on this now, it's going to convert it to a polygon mesh, but I want to show you some settings. So instead of just clicking on it here, I'm going to click on the box here that will open up its settings. And the one that I would like to point out to you is this setting here, Quad Output. I'm going to reset this so that you can see what the default behavior is. And if I apply, you'll notice that this is now a polygon mesh. In fact, if I right click on it, you'll see it has vertices, it has faces. You can model with this just as you would any other polygon mesh. The one drawback, the one thing I don't like about this is that it is currently composed of triangles, and I think quads are easier to work with. So I'm actually going to undo, get back to the state where it's still a brush stroke, and what I will do is check quad output. And now when I apply, when I convert the paint effects to a polygon object, it doesn't look like it changed at all, but in fact it did. This is a polygon mesh and it is composed of quads. This is really perfect for what we want to do. Now that we have our geometry, let's take a look at some of the, well, one of the reasons why I am suggesting that you convert it into a polygon object rather than keeping it a brushstroke is because it actually makes it a little bit easier to work with materials. And I'm going to create a material for this object here. So I will go to my Hypershade. And thinking about a neon sign, I think that probably a good material for it would be something like a Blinn. The reason being that a neon sign is typically made out of glass tubes, which would have some specularity on it. So I'll create a Blinn, and we'll make this one red, and we'll apply it to our mesh. So here we have our mesh, and it has our red material applied to it. Now, if I render this out, and I'm going to make sure I'm using Maya software right now, if I render this out, this is what I get. It's looking pretty good, but it doesn't exactly look like a neon sign. It doesn't look like it's glowing. Let's see what we can do to make it look better. I'll save this image so that we can compare it to some later images. To do that, I'm merely clicking on this button that says Keep Image. Okay. Perhaps what I'll do actually is bring down the color, make it kind of dark, still red, but kind of dark. And I'm going to change this property here, incandescence. And I will make that one red. And this will make it look much more like it's actually putting out light. So let's take a look and see what that looks like now when we render it. I'll keep this image and we can compare it to the other one. Here's the original, and I guess I moved my camera a little bit. Here's the one where it's using incandescence. A subtle difference, however, it does look a little more like it's actually putting out light. There's yet another thing that we can do to improve upon this material and make it look more like a neon sign. So let's check that out. The next property we'll take a look at will be here under Special Effects. Glow Intensity, right here. And you can see that it's set to 0 right now, meaning that it has no glow. And I can crank it all the way up to 1 if I want. Let's try cranking it up to just about 0.5 and then rendering it out. And as you can see, this is perhaps too much. I will save that image, however, keep that image. And we'll bring the glow intensity down considerably. We just don't want to bring it all the way down to 0, but we'll use a small value on it and try rendering it out again. And perhaps this is something more along the lines of what I want for my neon sign. Now, before wrapping up this video, I would like to show you one more thing that is very powerful about working with NURBS curves and using some of these techniques. And that is that because we still have history, we haven't deleted history yet. If I were to select my original NURBS curve and go into component mode, grab its control vertices, you'll notice that if I move them, the geometry, the polygon geometry, will update and it will take the changes to my original NURBS curve. So I can still adjust them if I need to. Anyway, I think that's enough for this video. I hope that you learned something from it, and thank you for watching.